the two verses really can't be connected and truly understand both of them. Now, the title of our study tonight is, I don't know if this is not working, Ken, you might have to click, is The Walking Dead. Now, I just want to say, I've never gotten into zombies. I really have no desire to watch zombie shows. So I've never seen a single second of this show. But the title is just so fitting for this text. Because, okay, let's read it together. Let's read verses 1 and 2 together just to introduce our study. And then we'll focus on verse 1 tonight. Paul says, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, as walking dead people, as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. So tonight we're going to focus on that first half, and it's no bells and whistles to this. We're just going to walk through the text, explore it together. And for me this week, it really hit me hard just studying this text. So I want to try to give you what I experienced this week in studying it. So we have 4 points as we go through the text. The first one, 2 pointers here in this text, 2 pointers. Notice this first phrase. Paul says, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God. Now, with that little phrase, Paul splits this letter to the Romans in half. The book of Romans really divides itself into 2 sections. The first one is chapters 1 through 11. And the second one is chapters 12 through 16. Now, the signal that Paul gives, that those are the major sections, is this little phrase right here. And he gives us 2 pointers to signal it. The first one is this word, therefore. Therefore. Now, usually, when we see the word therefore in a text, we refer back to what has just come before it, right? We want to read the paragraph right before that, try to figure out what the author is building on. But in this case, this therefore is referring to the entire first section of Romans, chapters 1 through 11. Now, if you're like me, you probably don't have chapters 1 through 11 right on hand, about like what that's all about. So Paul gives us a little hint here. Therefore, this is the second pointer, pointing us back to the first chapters, by the mercies of God. Now, if you want to sum up Romans 1 through 11 in one phrase, that's it. The mercies of God. Because God has found a way to be merciful to sinners in Jesus. In other words, because God has found a way to be merciful to us in Jesus. That's really the point of 1 through 11, that God has found that way. And then in chapters 12 through 16, he's going to build on that and say, because of that, because of who God is and what he's done, you act like this and you be like this. So he divides this letter in half, just with these 2 pointers, pointing us back to the beginning. Now, there's 1 point to this text. 1 point. We're going to go quickly through these first two points tonight. But there's 1 point to this text, and I want us to focus on this last phrase, because this is where all of the rest of the verse is heading. This is the conclusion of it all. Paul says, which is, all the rest of this verse is, your spiritual worship. Your spiritual worship. Now, I'm reading from the English Standard Version, which translate this word, the first word here, and on those last 2 words, as spiritual. But this is a very difficult word to translate. Some of you probably have reasonable or rational or logical in your translation. That's probably a better translation here. Paul is saying that in light of Romans 1 through 11, because of everything that God has done for us, whatever he's about to ask us to do is the most reasonable reaction possible. This is your reasonable, and what's the next word? Your reasonable worship. Now, this word was commonly used to refer to the duties of priests in the temple. This is your reasonable worship. Now, here's another example of this word, just to put it in context for us. Hebrews chapter 9 and verse 6. The priests go regularly into the first section, performing their ritual, here's the word, duties. Their ritual duties. So the priests are in the temple, and they're performing their duties, their worship, their service. Some of you probably have service here. And that's incidentally why we call what we're doing right now sometimes a worship service, right? We say that pretty often. And this is why. Not because it's service in the way that we think of like a wait staff at a restaurant serving people. It's service in a different way. It's this way. a priest would go into the temple and do his ritual duties. He would serve God. And by doing that, he would worship God. So that's the context of this word here. So even if you have service, what it's really pointing to is worship. That's the point of it. It's service that is worship. So they're serving God, these priests are serving God in worship in the temple. So that is the point of this verse. Reasonable, worshipful service. Remember that. Reasonable, worshipful service is where all the rest of this verse is heading. That's the point. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. We have one plea in this verse as well. One plea. Notice what Paul says. I appeal to you, brothers. Therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God. Now, here's the plea. I appeal to you to present. Now, this is a special word that's just drenched in Jewish overtones. He's asking them to present, right? In other words, to offer up, to give it up to God. This is total surrender of whatever he's about to ask them to present. So what does he ask them to do? Present your bodies. Give him everything. So it's not just my time, and it's not just my talents, and it's not just my money and my ideas and my creativity and my platform. I am supposed to give all of those things to God, but that's not enough. Paul says give him everything. Give him even your body itself. Now, to me, this is important to talk about for just a minute, because in a lot of churches and with a lot of Christians in our modern Christendom era here in America, we tend to think about volunteering our gifts and our time and our money to God. We tend to think that we can give a certain amount of money or time to God, and I'll say the rest of it for my life. We might not necessarily say that, but that's how we tend to think, that I'll give my certain amount of money every week, and that's my contribution to God, and then I'll use the rest of it for myself, my life, and obviously, not doing immoral things, but it's for me. It's kind of an amoral thing. There's no moral component to it. But if we're really applying this to our lives, we can't call anything about Christianity voluntary. I'm either all in or all out. My money is all God's or it's all mine. Same with my time. Same with my talents. And that's not to say that we should walk in here every week and just give up our paycheck, right? We just lay our paycheck in the baskets back there, and that's what God is asking for us to do. No, it's not so much about that as it is a reorientation of how we think about our money. It's not, I'm going to give as much as I can to the church and still be comfortable in my life. It's, I'm going to give this certain amount of money to the church, but even the rest of the money that I have, just because it's in my bank account, doesn't mean that it's mine. I'm still using it in a way that would glorify God. I'm using it to accomplish His will in my life because I'm presenting my body to Him. That means that everything that I have is God's. Now, returning back to the verse, apparently, doing that, giving God my everything, is what? Our reasonable worship. Giving God my everything is reasonable worship. Now, for me, that raises some questions in my mind. And I think it would have raised some questions in their mind as well. So let's talk first about their questions. For them, when they hear this, that presenting their body to God as a living sacrifice, as we're about to read, is a reasonable act of worship. For them, I think they're going to say, wait, but Paul, worship is something that priests do in the temple. It's this formal and rigid and located thing that they do. It's not this normal and earthy and natural thing that I do. Because to worship, you have, number one, you have to be a priest. Number two, you have to be in the temple. And number three, you have to offer up a sacrifice that's not you, right? But Paul here is saying to present yourself as a sacrifice. So to them, that's what worship is. It's a priest in the temple sacrificing something else. But Paul says, actually, that's not worship anymore. And the rest of the New Testament says, actually, that's not worship anymore. Notice this. What was the first thing you have to have for it to be worship? You have to have a priest. Well, Revelation chapter 1 and verse 6. Jesus has made us priests to His God and Father. 1 Peter 2, 5 and 9, we are a holy priesthood. So now, we are all priests. So there's number one. Number two, what's the second thing you had to have? A temple. Well, 1 Corinthians 6:19, do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit within you, whom you have from God? So now, we're the temple as well. There's number two. And number three, you have to sacrifice something. Well, that's what Paul's about to say here in Romans 12 and verse 1. We are the sacrifice as well. So now, worship isn't restricted to a specific time or a specific place or a specific person. Now, I am priest and temple and sacrifice all in one. And I don't only worship God in this room on Sundays. You know, obviously, absolutely, we must worship God with our brothers and sisters. We have to come together and worship together. But if that's the only worship that I'm giving to God, then I'm missing the point of this verse. Paul is saying that my actual bodily life, what I do with my hands and my feet and my lips and my ears and my arms, what I do with that must be given as a worshipful sacrifice to God. So we have to worship God in what we do every single day. Not only on Sundays and not only on Wednesday nights. We have to worship Him in what we do every single day. Whether that's cutting potatoes or punching in at work or changing a diaper. Now, obviously, those things are not worship in the same sense, right? Singing direct praises to God in this room is an entirely different type of worship than typing in a spreadsheet at work. That's not a direct action of worship. But I give my everything to God. That's the picture here. It's all His. I want to magnify and glorify and worship Him with everything I say and do and wonder and laugh at. I'm trying to give all of that to Him. Now, here's the equation that we're working with here. This is the only type of math that I can do. I keep forgetting that this isn't working. Yes, that's the equation. Okay, so the equation is this. And this is the type of math I can do. Like I said, the type of math where it's about the Bible and not actual math. So here's the equation in my mind to try to help communicate this. Body equals sacrifice equals worship. So the first part is very easy, right? In this text, my body is supposed to be presented to God as a sacrifice. That's pretty evident from the text. But that second half might be more suspect. Sacrifice equals worship. But remember that we're operating with Old Testament categories here. This is from an Old Testament context that these people are operating in. So a sacrifice is an act of worship. So sacrifice equals worship. So if body equals sacrifice and sacrifice equals worship, then what I do in my body every single day must be worship. Now, it's not that every single thing that I do is a direct act of worship, right? But that I am a worshipful entity now. I am a constant 24/7, 365 sacrifice to God. So when I give up everything about myself to God, it turns even the most boring and mundane tasks into actions that glorify Him. Because it's not about me anymore. It's not about whether my body, what I have to give to God, is attractive or intelligent or athletic. As a sacrifice, God doesn't care what your body looks like. He wants the beauty of your life, not the beauty of your looks. The reason why we have bodies is so through them, God can shine the beauty of Jesus. And what's the beauty of Jesus? Isaiah 53 and verse 2. He had no form or majesty that we should look at Him, and no beauty that we should desire Him. So the beauty of Christ is the beauty of love, not the beauty of looks. The beauty of Christ is the beauty of sacrifice, not the beauty of skin. God doesn't demand your body so He can have a model of attractiveness. He demands it so He can have a model of Christ's likeness. Turn, if you're still in Romans 12, look at Romans 8, verse 29. This text is so great. Romans 8:29. So you can be big or little. You can be tall or short. You can be clear-skinned or acne-scarred. You can have your hair fallen out, or you can have it all intact. And it doesn't matter with this sacrifice. Because when I present my body to God, it starts to look less and less like me and more like my big brother. Oh, I don't actually have a big brother in the flesh, but Romans 8:29. For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, in order that he might be the firstborn among many brothers. So you have a body for a purpose. And that purpose isn't to look like Brad Pitt or Scarlett Johansson or insert whatever attractive celebrity you want. Or for me, this week, I thought of someone in my life who I wish that I looked like on the outside. Think of someone in your life who you wish you looked like on the outside. You don't have a body so you can look like them. You have a body so you can be conformed more and more spiritually to the image of Jesus. So you can present your body as a living sacrifice to and for Him. Our body is supposed to be a mirror of Jesus. And what's cool about that is that Jesus was maybe one of the most average-looking people in Palestine at that time, right? He had no form or majesty that we should desire Him. So He's this average-looking guy. But He changed the world forever because His body was a 24/7, 365 sacrifice to His Father. And that's Paul's plea. We're supposed to do the same and be the same and look the same. That's his plea here. Now, the last thing I want us to notice is that he also gives us 4 particulars in this verse. 4 particulars that have to do with this plea. The first one is sacrifice. Sacrifice. Present your bodies as a sacrifice. It's easy for us in the 21st century, as English speakers, as people who live in the first world, it's easy for us to read this word sacrifice and just kind of let our eyes glaze over and not really intake what it's actually talking about. Because for most of us, I'll speak for myself, I've never killed anything larger than a bass, I don't think. Okay? For a lot of us, that's true. Most of us probably don't kill our food and then eat it. Some of us definitely do. A higher percentage here than in a lot of places because we have a lot of fishers and hunters. Some of y'all are about to spear me for saying you've never killed something. But for a lot of us, we haven't done that, or we at least don't do it on a regular basis. And I think it's safe to say that none of us have participated in the kind of literal sacrifice to which Paul is alluding here. Think about the image that this would have called to their minds. Just try to go back in time and think about these people. These people had seen their lamb, their animal that they owned, that they watched grow up. They had taken it to their priest. And this is going to be graphic, but I think it's important for us to think about. They had seen that lamb have its throat slit right in front of them. And the blood is pouring out. And that body of the lamb is taken, put on the altar, and burned right in front of them. Surely they could still smell that. That's not something that you're just going to forget. But that's sacrifice. That's this image. Notice this text from Leviticus chapter 1, verse 9. This is from the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament. This was Jesus' Bible, the Septuagint. And I want us to read from this Greek translation because it uses the same word as in Romans 12 and verse 1. They will wash its internal organs and its feet with water. And the priests will place everything upon the altar. Everything meaning the animal. It is a burnt offering, here's the word, a sacrifice, a sweet-smelling odor to the Lord. Now he talks about washing their internal organs. The thing about washing internal organs is that in order to wash them, they can no longer be internal, right? They have to be external. That is what Paul is calling for them to do. This plea was radical. Like, if we're getting into their minds, this is earth-shaking. He's asking them to be a throat-slit, blood pouring out, internal organs hanging out, burning sacrifice. And he's asking for us to do the same as well. And there's a reason why it's called sacrifice, right? Because nobody said this was going to be easy. I heard about a preacher, and I don't remember his name. I believe he was a member of the Church of Christ, but just from what I heard about him in this story, he was the type of guy who was just incredibly gentle, just never hurt a fly, Definitely never killed anything larger than a bass. But he was just this super nice guy. But he wanted to get into the minds of these old people who had grown up under Old Testament times and seen this type of sacrifice. So he went and bought a lamb. And he raised the lamb, just had it as his pet, day in, day out, took care of it, dealt with it personally every single day. And when it got to adulthood, he took the lamb and he killed it. And he held it in his arms as the lamb died. He watched the life drain out of it. Now, some of you have owned a farm or worked on farms, and you've seen the life drain out of an animal that you had to put down for whatever reason. That's not a fun experience. I was talking with one of my friends yesterday about that very thing. He grew up on a farm, and he just said, because I've never experienced that, so I can't speak to it. But he said that it's something that just takes something out of you every time you do it, watching that animal die. But that lamb dying is what Paul is calling for here, the sacrifice. Now, the next particular adds a layer onto this, and I'm thankful for this particular, because the next one is that this is a living sacrifice. I'm thankful that it's living, right? But I think in some ways, this actually makes it tougher. Because I no longer get to make a sacrifice by killing something else. I become the sacrifice by offering myself to God. So all of the horrendous imagery of that literal physical sacrifice has to be applied to my spiritual existence. It's just as serious, just as grotesque, just not quite as visible. Listen to Romans chapter 6, verse 13. Maybe flip back there with me, probably just a few pages back. Romans 6, verse 13. Paul says, "Do not present your members to sin as instruments for unrighteousness, but present yourselves to God as those who have been brought from death to life, and your members to God as instruments for righteousness." So notice that this combination of pictures where I'm supposed to be a living sacrifice, but then as someone who is brought from death to life, I then present my dead self that's been crucified with Christ, Galatians 2:20. I present that as living to God for Him to use. Philippians chapter 1, verses 20 and 21. Same writer as Romans, right? Philippians. Paul says, "It is my eager expectation and hope that I will not be at all ashamed, but that with full courage, now as always, Christ will be honored in my body," carrying that word over, "whether by life or by death. For to me to live is Christ, and to die is gain." Paul says, my body exists so that through it I can show everybody else just how valuable Jesus is. Whether by life or by death, I want Him to be magnified in my body. That's why I have a body, to make much of Jesus. I love that thought, to make much of Jesus. Paul absolutely lived this. As John 3 and verse 30 says, He must increase and I must decrease. Paul says that while I'm in this body, while I'm still in this life, that's what it's all about. It's about magnifying Jesus, making Him bigger in the eyes of everybody around me. 1 Corinthians 6, 19 and 20. We read the first part of verse 19 earlier. He continued, "You are not your own, for you were bought with a price. So glorify God in your body." I'm not my own. I don't own this body. I'm a renter. I'm a landlord. I'm in this tent. And while I'm in it, I'm supposed to be using it for the owner of it, to show how valuable and how awesome He is, to live in such a way that makes Him look more valuable than life, to make Him look like what He is, more precious than clothing and money and food and comfort and shelter and a job and even than ministry and even than my life. I have the body to worship Him by how I live in it. This next slide is a picture or an illustration of Theodore of Heraclia. Now, he was martyred for being a Christian in AD 306. Now, right before they chopped his head off with a sword, that's how he died. He said this, "I know not your gods. Jesus Christ, the only Son of God, is my God. Beat, tear, or burn me, And if my words offend you, cut out my tongue. Every part of my body is ready when God calls for it as a sacrifice. That's what it means to live this. And that's what it means to die this. It's being willing to live for Jesus and willing to die for him, because he lived and he died for me and for you. It's a living sacrifice. Now we have two more particulars, and we'll go through these quickly. The second to last one is that it is a holy sacrifice. Holy. This means that I'm set apart for God. I am only for him. Number 16 and verse 38 gives us an illustration of this. As for the censers, let them be made into hammered plates as a covering for the altar, for they offered them before the Lord, and they became holy. Now, there was nothing special about those censers, those pots. They were just censers, but they were set apart for God. They were used for his worship. They're only for him. That's how we're supposed to be, set apart for God's worship by how we live our lives. We're supposed to be holy. The fourth particular, acceptable. This is your acceptable sacrifice. Now, this is a strong word. It's not just that we're just barely getting by, just barely making it. It's okay. It's acceptable. No. This is a very strong word. Listen to Numbers 15 and verse 3. Offer to the Lord from the herd or from the flock a food offering or a burnt offering or a sacrifice, there's our word, to make a pleasing aroma to the Lord. That's the idea here. We're pleasing God. When I present my body as a living, holy sacrifice, it pleases God. And to me, I think this is a great place to end our study for tonight. Because I have to face this choice constantly in my life, and you do too. Will I choose to live today and tomorrow and the next day in a way that's pleasing and acceptable to God, or pleasing to myself? In a way that's pleasing to God, or in a way that's pleasing to the people around me at work or at school or in my home? Will I live in a way that's pleasing to God, or in a way that's pleasing to the expectations of the society that we live in? Now, sometimes that's not an either-or thing, right? Sometimes we can live in a way that's pleasing to God and be pleasing to ourselves or to the people around us or to our society. But I think probably more often than we would like to admit, it's a separate thing. And I have to choose whether or not I will live in a way that's pleasing to God or choose my way. That's a tough choice. But in those moments where I'm choosing that, even in the smallest moments, that's when my character is revealed. That's when it's revealed to me whether I really am a living sacrifice, a person who has done the reasonable, worshipful thing and given their body up, their very life up, as a sacrifice for God, to live for him and not for myself. If you haven't taken that first step, won't you do it tonight as we stand and as we sing?